Hi, my name is Maria Gisela Sanchez, and I'm one of the counselors that work at CAPS in Capoli Pomona. I'm hoping that this presentation will give you some helpful information to understand how you've been feeling or coping with the current pandemic, as well as some ideas to better navigate this experience. These images may come as very familiar to you. We have been bombarded by them for the last months. Now we know COVID-19, coronavirus, is almost all over the world, and we have been facing significant changes in our lifestyle as we're trying to navigate as safely as possible this health crisis situation. But how is COVID-19 impacting us psychologically? So there is two things that I think are important to understand. One is that COVID-19 has changed life as we knew it, and some of the discomfort that we may be experiencing can be very similar to those that we face when we are going over some grief experiences. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that COVID-19 is bringing significant life safety concerns and uncertainty, and this situation could be labeled as a collective trauma experience. So what happens when we are grieving, when we are trying to cope with the loss of a loved one? We usually go over different phases characterized by feelings as we are going through a process of grief. And I think it's really similar to what we may be experiencing as we are facing life in a different way. So some of the feelings that we may overcome are initially denial. A lot of people may even avoid the idea that change is taking place. There may be some confusion, some shock, some fear. Soon after, we may experience anger. For some of us, that may come across as frustration, irritation, and even anxiety. Some of us will experience as well what is called depression or sadness. Eventually, we may move into a phase that is called bargaining, and it's when we're struggling to make sense or create new meaning with the reality that we're experiencing. A lot of times when we are in that phase, we may reach out to others and start telling our story to try to make sense of it. Eventually, we may get to a phase of acceptance when we have been able to feel that we are moving on and adjusting to the new living situation. Just keep in mind that all these feelings that have been described in this graphic may not always happen in that linear sequential wave as they are in the graphic. It is very normal if we may experience some denial, anger, depression, and then go back to anger because of a sudden change that happened again through this experience. It is very possible that as we are navigating this pandemic, we may go through recurrent waves of these, just like as we are when we are in the ocean trying to overcome the waves. The situation is constantly changing and evolving, so be patient with yourself. We may go through this wave of grief in recurrent times and phases. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this experience can be labeled as a collective trauma. Even though the pandemic is affecting all of us at a different level and in different ways, it is shocking, is scary, and is threatening. When you look at this graphic is the way in which situations like tragedies or disasters have been understood and explained. It is possible that this is what we may see happen, socially speaking, for all of us as we go through this pandemic. If you look, the first stage is characterized by some fight-flight responses, which are typical of a state of panic and could be exemplified by people's behaviors of trying to shop, buying a lot of amounts of things like toilet paper. Eventually, we may start getting accustomed to the situation, move away from that fear and shocking situation. And as we head on a honeymoon stage, which may be what is happening right now for some people that is trying to push back on some of the health recommendations, we may hit a disillusionment, and cases of the disease, of the virus may increment. Overall, we know when we have faced trauma collectively, it will take time and it's also a wave of events. It will be very, very different moments where we may have to reprocess the losses and the losses that we may have experienced at different levels and at different times. Overall, humanity had overcome trauma in other moments. Pandemics have occurred through our history, and it is very possible that we will all together, as much as we can, will reach a place of acceptance and adjustment. What is really important to do through all this process is to really listen to the recommendations from public health and our governments, who are trying to keep us all safe as best as possible. Are you experiencing any of these feelings? Maybe having some difficulties to sleep, some change in your appetite, some racing thoughts, excessive worry, maybe you're feeling tired, you're lacking motivation, you're not feeling as motivated as before, you find yourself procrastinating, maybe you notice some tension in your body, sadness, irritability, and maybe even the tendency to kind of distance yourself from others and spend more time alone. All those feelings can be very normal manifestations and expression of what we are going together through. We are trying to adjust to these life changes. So what is happening in our brain when we are going through these changes? Let's look at the brain. As you see, the brain here is being divided in three phases: the instinctive brain, the emotional brain, and the thinking brain. And there is some stress responses that we'll be talking about, the fight, flight, freeze responses. So if you imagine your brain as your hand, your wrist will be your instinctive brain, your thumb will be your emotional brain, and the rest of your fingers will be the thinking brain. The instinctive brain is the one that is first developed when we are in the uterus of our mother. This part of the brain is responsible for regulating when we are awake, when we're asleep. It's like a switch. It helps us regulate those basic functions. The emotional brain, here shown as the thumb, is formed by different areas. One of them is the amygdala. This system is well known as the limbic system. This system is the one that is responsible for creating survival responses. When our brain senses a situation that is dangerous or is threatening or safety, there will be automatic responses like the fight, flight, freeze responses, which help us survive and stay alive. The thinking brain can process information at different levels and from different sources. When we are processing visual information, it's usually going to the occipital areas in the back of our brain. When we are processing information that has to do with our motor skills, it usually goes in the parietal areas. Then the prefrontal cortex, which is in the very front, behind our forehead, and make us so different to other animals in Earth. This part of the brain is the one that helps us regulate emotion, postpone gratification, plan goals for the future. It's because of this area of our brain that we're able to stay in university for 4 to 5 years, because we eventually get a degree. A lot of the processings that take place on the instinctive and the emotional brain are happening at a preconscious level. Most of them are pre-verbal. They are very instinctual responses. So when we are facing a situation like this pandemic, which faces us with risk and uncertainty, most likely the parts of our brain that will be constantly activated will be those lower areas of the brain, like the limbic system. So something that we can do to help ourselves is take the time to try to reflect and observe ourselves. When we do that, we are bringing the thinking brain into the picture and helping it with the use of language, thought, and reflection to soothe the limbic system and to realize that even though the situation is difficult, that we may be safe for now, that we have food, that we are home, that we have situations that protect us. So it is really important to pay attention to how our body is feeling. So emotions are originated in the brain, but they manifest in the body. And many times part of the issue is that we may be feeling it physically, but we don't have words for it. But having words for those feelings will help us realize what is going on and make sense of the experience. Many times, some of those fight, flight, freeze responses are understood as behavioral acting responses, like literally fighting or escaping or freezing. But many times when we are facing stressful situations, those responses may be manifesting inward. So for example, the fight response may be manifesting through self-criticism. Maybe now you are experiencing more negative thoughts towards yourself and you hear yourself telling yourself those things more often. The flight response may be manifesting through isolation, maybe even though you have people to communicate with where you live, or through social media or video chat, you find yourself not really seeking those connections and spending more time alone. Another way in which those responses may manifest in the form of freezing may be through rumination. Rumination actually is when we are thinking a lot of things, but we don't get into action. So for example, if you're trying to finish a final assignment for one of your courses, you may find yourself thinking a lot about it, but unable to actually sit in the computer and work through it. So these are just some of the ways in which those stress responses may be manifesting right now. So something to think about is that there are different zones that we may be experiencing as we are going through this pandemic. And the question is, who do you want to be during this COVID-19? I am sure most of you may have gone through these phases. Many of us have been on a fear zone when we were complaining a lot about what was happening. We were getting mad very easily. We were spreading our own emotions, fear and anger, and sharing it with others. Or maybe we were just some of those panic shoppers, buying a lot of things because we didn't know how everything was gonna look in the future. Maybe some of us have also been able to be in the learning zone. And the learning zone start manifesting when we start identifying our emotions. We try to be more aware of the situation and think about how we're acting. We may be more capable of evaluating the information that we're receiving before spreading anything false. And we may be able to start stopping some compulsive behaviors like eating or drinking because we realize that those behaviors are hurting us. We'll start to be able to start trying to give up on the things that we cannot control. And then many of us may have been already on the growth zone during this pandemic, which is when I'm able to be more empathic towards myself and others, when I'm starting to appreciate what I have and what others are able to offer me. I am trying to maintain a happy emotional state and I'm trying to spread hope. I'm also looking more actively for ways to adapt to the new changes, trying to practice patience and creativity. So as we go through this pandemic and things continue to change and move, just like the waves of the ocean, we may be visiting these three zones at different times. So just try to be patient with yourself. Realize that going through this pandemic can be an opportunity to grow. So what can we do to help us through this situation? So here are some basic coping principles that I am sharing with you with the hope that you could implement them and try to adapt them to your own way of living. So the first one is, it is important to find balance in the things that you are thinking. So observe your thoughts and try to find balance on those thoughts. It is really important to be able to come into the present and to slow down. If you find yourself going at a very fast pace, either because you have multiple thoughts at once or you're really trying to do multiple things at once, it's important to slow down and to try to focus on the present. It is crucial that we accept and let go what we cannot control. There are multiple things in our life that are out of our control right now. And accepting that, identifying and recognizing the difference is key. The other thing that is really important is stocking up on compassion. You need it, everybody needs it. This is a hard time to go through, and only compassion will help us go through it. So some practical tips that I want to share with you all is the first one, it is important to manage our media diet. So I am not suggesting for you to avoid the news entirely. Absolutely not. We need to be informed. But maybe just manage how much access to the media you are having. Maybe 2 or 3 times a day in a very trusted resources like the Center of Disease Control or the World Health Organization. Part of the main issue is that our routine got thrown out of the window. So sticking out to our routine, creating a new routine and following it is important. Our brain craves predictability and structure. So the more we can give that to ourselves, the better we will be able to cope. It is really important that when you are creating that new routine, you make time for breaks, meals, sleep, and enjoyable activity. I know it is very tempting to spend multiple hours watching movies or doing things that you couldn't do before, but remember, resting is really important. And the other thing that is crucial is make sure that that routine is focusing on the things that you can control, the things that you can actually do. Many people is frustrated, for example, about not being able to go to the gym. And the reality is that is not an option right now. So the question is, what other ways I have to exercise and stay active? Is it maybe taking a walk? Is it maybe following a tutorial video at home? There is options. Try to focus on what you can control. The other big tip is to offer and seek support. When we support others, we feel joy and we find a sense of purpose. We are mammals. We crave connection. We crave interaction with others. The other thing to keep in mind, this is not the first time humanity is overcoming a pandemic, and we're actually very fortunate to have technology in our side. Imagine 100 years ago, there was not internet and people was coping with a situation like this through letters. Now we are very fortunate. We can actually have video conference, conversations with friends and family. I understand it doesn't feel exactly the same, but it's much better. So let's make use of that. We do need to stay connected. The other important tip is to connect with your body. We need to get out of our head and into our body, and the best way to do that is through movement. Research have shown that when we exercise, when we have some type of physical activity, we help our brain and our body to decrease stress. So finding some sort of physical activity and movement is important. Taking breaks, finding a way to have some contact with the air or the sun if you have a balcony or a little backyard, or if you can take a walk around your neighborhood while practicing the physical distance guidelines, please do that. And through the day, be attentive to your body and give yourself the opportunity to take deep calming breaths as much as you need them. Some activities that will be or could be very helpful to assist us on that goal of focusing on the present are some of these ones. So mindfulness is a very helpful technique that allows us to become aware of our body sensations or feelings and our thoughts. Practicing mindfulness is easier and more than easier these days. There are multiple apps that can be used for free in your devices. Gratitude can be a very helpful practice. So trying to identify what you're grateful for will bring some sense of positivity into your life. Music tends to be a very helpful way for people to feel good and transport themselves into a different state of feeling. So if you love music and is any particular music that you enjoy either to listen or to play, this is a good time to do that. Writing can also be a very helpful way of getting out of our head. When we are able to express our thoughts and our feelings either to another person or in writing, we are diffusing all that tension from our minds, and that will help decrease rumination. Laughing is essential, so do whatever helps you to laugh. For some people, maybe some comedy movies or some podcasts, whatever way you can find that will be helpful. For many of us, this pandemic has been a great opportunity to rediscover or to discover new hobbies or interests. So whatever it is that you used to enjoy doing but didn't have the time to do before, this may be a good time to try it out. Or maybe there was the plan of learning a new language or reading a book that was in your bucket list for a while. This is a good time to do that. So this is a little bit of how my adjustment has been looking. So I am also working from home. It took a transition. Even my plants moved with me. I'm now working from my living room. I was able during this time to retake on a project, a very long life project that I had of, crocheting a blanket. I actually started doing it 10 years ago, and even though I had the material, never got around to do it. I'm happy now to report that I'm actually almost at the end of it, and that has been very helpful. I love gardening, so as soon as all this experience started, and because of the spring, I was able to plant some seeds, and that has been really helpful for me to have something to look forward and to keep my attention on, which is my garden. I love cooking, and I am been enjoying it even more during these times, making sure I'm planning my meals in the most tasty and healthy way possible, and enjoying my time in the kitchen and eating. Resiliency is the capacity that we have to rebound and to stay intact after we have gone through a tragedy or difficult experience. We humans have that capacity, so I'm very hopeful that together and with the support of the public health guidelines, that we will be able to overcome this situation. In the picture, that little plant is one of the ones that I planted recently and is growing now, and I hope that plant can give you some hope. Life continues. So, and of course, remember, we are here to help you. There is multiple campus resources that are available to you, and this is just a few to list. There is the Academic Learning Support Services, the Bronco Basic Needs, the Disability Resource Center, and of course, us, counseling and psychological services. You can call us or look up for more resources and videos like this in our website. Thank you. I hope that this information will give you some support and help as you are navigating the waves of the pandemic.